Live on Shally's Alley. It is Friday, March 3rd, the first Friday in March. Today we have an unusual situation. We have special guests, plural. Normally, this is a one on one conversation, but Joe and Holly had an idea that maybe we can actually, all three of us, get on the call together. And I thought that was a really good idea. For those of you that are not aware, we actually used to work together, the three of us, in the same company. Can you imagine that? Me working with somebody else at a company? No, I'm just kidding. So, Holly and Joe were members of the Fiserv talent acquisition team, along with me. And Holly was there before I got there. Actually, Joe was also there before I got there. And I'm pretty sure both of them stayed past when I left. No, yeah, right. So I was there for
Yeah.
about 5 years. Holly, you were there for what? 8, maybe
9. Yeah.
9.
Yeah.
Joe, you the same or
Yeah,
more?
that's almost 17. Almost 17.
You 7. Oh my God, right. That's
Yeah.
right. And you
Mhm.
are in Rochester.
Close. I'm actually kind of in between Buffalo and Rochester, New York, so I'm
Okay.
kind of equal distance to both. But yeah, not too far. And I know that you're an RIT graduate, and not too far from RIT. Probably about an hour from RIT.
Yeah, that's where I went to school. Yeah, so upstate New York. Yeah. Oh, you got some fans already. There's Ed. Ed's another one that used to work with us. Hey, Ed.
And,
Hey,
and
Ed.
Greta.
And Greta. Wow, it's the whole
Hey, Greta.
family. Should we let him in?
It's a reunion. I love it. Hi, Ed. Hi, Greta.
Fun times.
That's awesome.
Well, we actually had a couple of interesting things to talk about, and what I was thinking is to kick things off. We all were at the same organization where things had been set up a certain way, and we learned how to operate in that environment. Joe, you were there 17 years. I was there probably that was my longest tenure at a single employer so far. Definitely not going to be my longest in my lifetime, but definitely my longest so far. And now that we've all moved on to other places, I kind of wanted to talk about the differences, right? Like and the similarities. So what has stayed the same as you've moved into other roles, and what has been almost a shock? Like, what have you been really surprised that has changed as you moved into this other organization, and what has actually, again, been surprisingly the same? You guys have any place you want to start?
First, I want to say hi to Karen C. Walker, who joined also.
Karen! Oh my
Best manager on the planet ever, of all managers.
God. Wow, it's the whole family.
I know. It's making I'm getting verklempt.
Yeah.
So
Hey,
I can take
Karen.
first, if you don't mind, Joe. I can jump in.
Yeah, sure.
Because I've bounced around a little more than Joe has. I've been alive longer and had a few more jobs before we were at Fiserv, and then since, actually, because I've been in consulting and shifted fully over to the operations side. And so I've seen some smaller organizations and that are not in the fintech space, not federal contractors. So that has had some impact on kind of what I've seen as well, I think. But the common thread for me is that they're all using Workday recruiting, because that's where my expertise is. But I think I was shocked a little bit at some of the lack of, and not where I am today. They're actually in good shape today, but some of the places I've consulted before I landed here at Endeavor, there's, I think, less of a concern or maybe awareness around just, kind of compliance. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and I think that leads to, I think a lot of us, when we were at Fiserv, because we knew it wasn't a matter of if we were going to get audited, it was when, because Fiserv is a big federal
It's a
contractor.
big organization, yeah.
It's
And a federal contractor.
Yeah, so you have to really live in the system, and you've got to, keep your data as clean as you can. And so I think when that's, not sort of lurking over your shoulder, sometimes you're not paying quite as much attention to kind of living in the system. So I've learned that, and what that's kind of prompted me to do is really look for other reasons why someone would want to live in the system, right? We want to have clean data. We want to be able to tell, like, what is a recruiter's workload, and can they take on more, or should we shift some load balance a little bit with the rest of the team.
Wow, you just hit 3 major topics. So compliance, and not just compliance, but like the entire what's the word, like Overwatch. There's legal compliance. There's also, things that are not necessarily legal requirements, but that are ethical standards, and are, other governing bodies. Let's call them governing bodies that have impact on. And I'm surprised. This has always been surprising to me how few recruiters are actually aware of the variety of governing bodies that have an impact and an influence and a say in what we do in the field of recruiting. There's 7 different agencies. It's
Mm.
not,
Yeah.
most people just think, oh, it's the EEOC. There's 7 different ones. So you hit on that, and then you hit on the whole technology side of things, and then the data. Data hygiene is,
Yeah.
Holly. We had so
Touchy.
many conversations about this. Everywhere I've been, I've always been shocked that the quality of data is not very good in our industry, because people don't think about these things when they set them up. For example, and I'll just use one example to illustrate. At Fiserv and at other organizations, when different systems are implemented, sometimes the naming structure of an individual user is created differently. So, for example, in one system, it's Peters, comma Joe, and in the other system, it's Joseph Peters, right?
Yeah.
And you can't match them up together, because it's not like it's the same employee ID, because on the one system they don't use employee IDs, and on the other one they do. So you have like employee ID over here, and user ID over here, and email address over here. But even the email address could be Joe.Peters, or it could be Joseph.Peters, or J Peters, or whatever. And then you want to have these reports. People want a report that involves all 3 systems. How do you match it up? Because it's 3 different Joes.
Yeah. I
Right.
remember those days, Shally, where we were pulling our hair out over, trying to get that right and matching things up, and how many tries you had to do to try to figure out exactly what we needed to do to get it right. And so I think Power BI is kind of coming more into play, where companies are using that. But what I've seen is
To build
Workday now.
translation, so you can say,
Yeah,
okay, this entity is these 3 entities, and kind of, okay.
right. Yeah, to make sense of it. But there's that whole integration piece, right? Whatever system you're using unless you want to do a bunch of manual feed, you've got to integrate your system with Power BI. And so I think that's the bigger challenge for a lot of companies too. And Workday actually has kind of a semi answer to Power BI. It's not nearly as fancy yet. Maybe they'll get there, but it's called Discovery Boards. And I've just been able to use that recently, and it's
This is
pretty
new.
cool. Yeah, a newish. Yeah. I think it's been around a little while through a few releases, but I just haven't landed anywhere that actually had it live in their system until
And it's a
recently.
reporting system.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's basically where you can choose your filter. So you're like creating the report in real time, basically within Workday, and there's a drive that everybody has in their settings, and they can just click on it and it'll show them. So it's got graphs and charts, and it's not just the bare data that then it has to export into Excel, which is typically what happens when you run kind of a standard report
Hmm.
in Workday. And that's all still there, right? You can still do that, but that's like a point in time view, right? As soon as you run that report, pull it out of
It's already
Workday,
obsolete.
it's obsolete, something's changed. But this Discovery Boards is updating, every time you look at it. So you go into, and you can export from that as well, but it just gives you all kinds of different views and slices and, ways of looking at the data. So it feels a little bit like, kind of what you might see if you were an end user who was just going in to look at something in Power BI.
Okay.
So it's kind of nice. And there's no integration, right? Because it's just using data that's already there in
It's already pulling that.
your
Yeah.
system. I'm not, trying to sell anybody on it, but it was just a nice
No, it's a good thing. If you work
nice to
on
have.
Workday, you may not even be aware of it, right? So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. So,
And
what advice do either of you or both of you have for people that may be setting things up, and just to prevent some of these headaches that we all encountered? Like, what I'll start. One of the things for me would be, make sure that you're mapping the single pivotal point of what a user ID is across all of the systems equally. So either stick to the email address, or stick to a code number or something like that. Because what happens otherwise is, people have middle names, nicknames, preferred names, married names, all
Mhm.
these other things that change these IDs, and you can easily overlook or even report on the wrong data. So that would be my big piece of advice would be lock down whatever the key is for a user field that is you're going to be your identifier for what a person's lookup code is. That's mine. What do you guys got?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the consistency, right? So there's agreement on what's being used and that it's not, it's not changing, or that, there's not area for confusion on what's being used. So I do think it's the consistency.
Yeah, so when it comes to the integrations, because I've seen so many of these and they're, usually some degree of painful, right? It depends because it's 2 different teams, 2 different companies typically working
Right,
together
right. Could
and
be a merger, an acquisition,
right.
or yeah,
There's a lot of that as
yeah.
well. So it could be that, like a company A, a company's or acquires company B, and then they've gotta, um, live in sort of 2 worlds within the same world, which is challenging, and we've been through
Mhm.
that, all 3 of us. And lots of folks who are on the in the chat over there too have felt that pain and kind of getting everybody out of the 2 system duality and into one. So there's that scenario, but then there's also just integrating your like ATS, for example, with another system. And I think Shelly's right, and Joe, like you have to be consistent. You got to, and I think people tend to sort of hold on to like this is the way we've always done it, and there's not
Yeah,
necessarily any sort of reason other than that to keep doing something the same way. I've encountered that quite a bit myself. Consulting, with companies that maybe aren't as far along in their journey as we might have been in our talent acquisition team at Fiserv. So it's you kind of have to meet people where they are, right, and understand what might be the reason why they're sort of holding on to something that could be potentially keeping that integration from
hmm.
being successful, from moving along more quickly. So
You're
I think
saying
that,
ask why you're holding on to that.
yeah, I mean, just try to understand. You may not want to just directly ask, but just try to get, talk about
Why
it.
are you holding on to it?
What's wrong with you?
Let it go.
Let it go.
Just get to the bottom of that, and try to understand. Because then I think you can come back and, like Karen Walker will love this, like the WIFM, the what's in it for me. We put that at the top of our anytime I'm trying to get a group of people at a company to come into Workday, right? Maybe they've never used it before and they're shifting from another system, or just start using it more, right? To live in it and let's, click on the button on the day something happens instead of, 2 weeks later. You've got to sell them on why does this matter to me? Why is this going to be helpful to me? So I think that's a big part of integrations too, is is it going to be worth this pain, right? And why would we want to use this tool? Because we've all seen companies spend, frankly, some big dollars on tools that then did not get utilized properly. So, you've really got to sell people on what that tool is going to do for them. And then I think kind of stay on it, right? Sort of consistent outreach and training and, make sure people are really understand how to use it, first of all, and, put some kind of either reward or, punitive something around not using
Involved
it.
an incentive for
Yeah.
utilization of the. That's a very good point. So, people think, oh yeah, you had it easy because at Fiserv, big company, lots of money. Well, it kind of it goes both ways. On the one hand, if you work for a large organization, you do need more advanced enterprise grade technology because you're doing things in a volume scale. 50,000 IDs to look up, and you do have perhaps the financial the buying power to acquire a higher end software like Workday. I mean, it's not cheap. You have to be a certain size company to afford that kind of and to need it in the first place, right? But
Right.
it also cuts the other way, which is it's really hard to get anything approved. So if you need to add something on or buy a bolt on to make this talk to that, it's not like you can just flip the switch on. You have to go through approvals and everything. So it takes longer to spend. You have to plan further in advance. You might be planning for a year or two before you're able to kick off an integration like that. I know, Holly, it's taken you 2-3 years sometimes to launch an implementation of Workday.
Yeah. It does take a while, and I think Fiserv is a good example of when we were shifting all the first data folks off of Taleo and into Workday. I mean, that was I think 18 months or something, and I mean,
Mhm.
that was a
Just a
huge
lift and shift.
just to lift and shift that many people because we had to
Yeah.
tackle it regionally, right? Because in some cases we even had to like translate the training materials into another language. I think it was done in Portuguese and maybe at least
Oh,
one other country we translated. So, and you've got to, I think, kind of tackle it in small bites like that if you can, because stuff's going to come up and everybody has different needs, right? There, specifically within recruiting, we know there are lots of laws, right? And those may be different from one country to the next. So it usually worked better for us if we tackled a project regionally and sometimes even broke it down country by country, which is what we did when we automated offers in Workday recruiting. It was, one country at a time. And each country had very unique needs and laws and, even specific to like the onboarding piece as well, because it was, kind of offers all the way into onboarding and where's somebody supposed to park? Do we have a piece of paper that we need to turn into a PDF and deliver to them about, here's where to park when you drive to the office? I mean, it was so specific sometimes. You have to really kind of meet, I think, smaller groups of people where they are.
so that's it prompts me to ask the question of, all right, if you have centralized technology that is supposed to be, enterprise grade, but it's not being used correctly, whatever it is. Let's say it's and let's not say correctly, but it's not being adequately utilized. It's underutilized or very lightly utilized, and you have that technology. Of course, if you try to get approval for a competitive technology, they're going to be like, well, we already have this, why not use that, and so on. So an example might be for people that are listening. There's a way to combine LinkedIn data with Workday data, and this is not uncommon. There's other technologies where you can do similar things, import data into, to clean it up. But there's always these caveats. So, do you have any advice for people that might potentially be looking at um, an integration from a technology that they think isn't working, but it's because it wasn't properly implemented? And maybe they're like, is there possibly another like, how would you explain this to them and say, hey, maybe what you need to do is get the most out of what you're actually using right now rather than try to get approval to
Mhm.
buy something else? Because I see this a lot, migrating from this to that in ATSs, for example. They're with this ATS for 2 years, then they go to the next one and they go to the next one. Is it really that they need a new ATS, or is it that they never set it up right? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, I think what I've seen that's most important is really evaluating, the technologies that are being used, because it's very easy, I think, for a lot of companies to kind of jump on to whatever the next thing is that is presented to them as a tool. And there's no shortage of, tools that are out there to help with recruiting, whether it's sourcing or with ATS systems or other technologies. And so it is important to really take a step back and evaluate, like, what are you using today? Is it accomplishing what you're looking to do? And like you mentioned, Sheila, like maybe it just wasn't implemented correctly at the onset, or the users just don't, they don't know how to use it. There's not maybe a desire to use it. It's not adding value. And yet it may be something that an organization just continues to use over time, because at one point it looked really great. And I think that's especially important in organizations sometimes where, there may be a new leader or someone that maybe steps into a role, implements software, and it just doesn't get utilized because there wasn't, it wasn't a need for it, but it looked really great in that time. When I think about workdays specifically, I do think there are organizations sometimes that do struggle with its use, because it is a it can be complex in terms of what it can do. There's, kind of the out of the box opportunity to use it, and then there's a lot of customization that can be done in Workday to meet the organization's needs. So that is something, that I've become more aware of as I've used Workday, is that it does look different in different organizations. So it's not always a case where, it's going to look exactly the same or function the same way across the board. So I think for those that are, feeling like they're not getting what they need out of
Hmm.
the technology, I think they need to really
Yeah.
be in
Yep.
dialogue with those that are using the technology to understand, is
Why
this
they're not
still
using it?
adding value for you? Is it getting what we need? Can we put those dollars towards something different? And when I think about Workday specifically, it's, are the users trained on how to use it? Are we encouraging self-service, which, is really, that's how Workday is
Got it.
designed, is to promote that.
So
and
ask,
making
is it
sure,
broken or does
yeah,
it not do what you want or do you
right,
just not know how to do what you want?
Yeah.
right,
Yep. And the other thing I've noticed, because Joe mentioned this too, so and I think some companies get into this trap of they make their like job profiles, for example, and things like that so complex and so voluminous that if you want to actually go to self-service, manager self-service, where they're going in and creating their own job recs, we create these obstacles for them that are, I mean, they're gonna do it, what, once a year, maybe the average hiring manager hires somebody once
right,
a year, if that frequently, and so there's, I think, a lack of training, there needs to be, like, on-demand training, right, that's required, right? If you wanna create a job rec, go in and do this training, but also the onus, I think, sits on other COEs within the broader HR group to think about the end user, right? Like the average person who's not an expert on job profiles and job architecture and things like that, or give them some really good training on those things as well. Because we essentially can set people up to fail if we create other systems and sort of directories. And this is our long list of 3,000 job profiles. Well, the average hiring manager is not going to know which one of those to pick if they're asked. So I think that's part of it as well. The other thing I've seen as I've moved from, through several companies that are using Workday, and I agree with Ed, his comment about that, if you have more functionality, it can definitely cost companies more money. That is not incorrect. So there's definitely add-ons, right? There's a ton of add-on things you can buy just for your average Workday recruiting module. You can tack things on. They have like their answer to a CRM tool now that's called candidate engagement. They've got Workday messaging where you can send SMS texts out to candidates through Workday. And, just what I mentioned with discovery boards, those are all add-ons and they cost additional money. But even basic Workday has a lot of functionality, a lot that can be turned on and configured in the right way. And what I've seen fairly consistently is that if you look at, like, let's just stick in Workday, for example, there's different COEs that are using Workday: payroll, compensation, there's maybe you have time and attendance, there's talent management, performance management, and there's recruiting. And if you look at those groups, for example, just that handful of groups, recruiting by leaps and bounds are heavier users of Workday than any of those other groups. And so it would sort of logically follow that you would need the right number of HRIS, like technology experts in Workday, to be the partners for your recruiting team to get in and get things, configured on the fly for you, and answer any sort of like break fix, right? Ad hoc requests to get stuff done right in the moment, right? Like this is blowing up today and we need help with it right now. And again, against those other COEs, if you compare, recruiting to like payroll, compensation, not that those groups don't have deadlines and not that they don't have like times of the year
Yeah,
when
payroll
there's,
has a deadline every couple
yeah,
of weeks.
that's a consistent deadline, right? It's always the same, and they know when it's coming. And and not to diminish the work that those folks do, because they're all great, and it's all very critical and important, right? And it all works together to make
I like
everything,
getting paid.
yeah, right, to make the magic happen. But from a recruiting perspective, like we run like salespeople, right? I mean, it's just
That's
constant
true, and that is
deadlines.
part of why the data is sometimes missing. You just
Yeah,
you sometimes don't have you can't stop to put in all
right.
the details. I get that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not. I don't think there's anybody's fault. But when you mix technology together or try to get technology to work together, missing data is just as bad as incorrect data.
true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true for sure. Agree. We love good data hygiene.
So the other thing I wanted to ask was about the compliance, right? So we talked a little bit about how some companies just compliance is almost built in because it's a larger company or they work with the government, they have more restrictions. There's and clearly there are times when organizations have just been singled out, for whatever reason, and get frequently audited. They're frequent flyers, not because they're frequent violators, but that just happens. And then there's organizations that never get audited, right? Um, so what have you noticed in your in your travels? Because Fiserv, for me, having worked at large technology companies, Google, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, retail companies, um, I've seen different types of compliance related and privacy related things. And but at Fiserv, I learned a lot about the kind of data that it's transactional data around money, and money is not, it's not replaceable. You can't copy and paste money, right? It's like this finite number. You can't back it up. You can't have a duplicate of, like, here's my money and then here's like my backup. So at Fiserv, they were very sensitive about security and about compliance. In addition to the regular HR related compliance, there's also banking industry specific compliance
Right.
regulations and things that we had to do for hiring practices, for example, certain types of background checks and so on. But at other companies, things aren't like that. They're sometimes looser, may not even be aware. Do you know of anything? Is there anywhere where you could point to what you should and shouldn't have? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think any employer, if we're just talking about the US, right? If
In the
that's,
U.S., yeah, that's a good point.
yeah,
Right.
GDPR is a whole separate thing, but if you're just looking at the US, I mean, there's definitely hiring laws that protect people. Even if the company's not a federal contractor, they're not also bound by banking regulations because they're in the, banking industry. There are fair hiring practices that have to take place. So I think, for the most part, most companies, I think above a certain number of employees are, and even below that number, right? You could still sue for unfair hiring practices, right? Someone can still do that. There's nothing to
Right.
stop you from doing that and winning in the US. So, but beyond a certain number of employees, even if you don't have that extra OFCCP layer that you have to worry about, and even if you're not a huge company with really deep pockets, where I think sometimes those agencies will pay a little more attention to the companies that can actually afford the fines, in terms of, who are we going to audit next. But so I think there is a layer of that as well. And part of what I've also seen in recruitment delivery is that we tend to not spend a lot of time training, like, or we may train recruiters on that, but we might not necessarily train hiring managers on that, for example, right? There's a lot of discussion, for example, around like DE and I, and you want to have a, certain diverse slate, right? But what does that mean? And are we just training the recruiters on that? Or are we training, the hiring managers on that too? And hiring managers tend to be the wild card a little bit, right? I think recruiters will agree with that we can train the heck out of ourselves, but um, hiring managers may not be as trained, and that's a little bit harder to do. Tends to be a much bigger population, and there has to be motivation for them, right? And if they only hire once every 18 months, you kind of think, well, is it worth spending this money? Why bother doing that? And we've certainly seen where training hiring managers can make a difference. And we did all the lovely candidate experience training at Fiserv. Um, Joe and I were just talking about that the other day about that. So I think it's possible to do it, but companies just have to decide this is what we want to do, because we want to avoid, getting ourselves into hot water, even if we're not, federally bound to do that, like by the OFCCP.
Yeah. I think when I think about compliance, the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me is really around going beyond what is required, but just really doing the right thing. And so there are certain things that yes, some organizations may not have certain audit restriction or audit concerns, or have compliance things that they need to keep in mind. Many do, but those that don't, I think they still need to be keeping in mind, making sure they're doing the right thing. And I think about job postings a lot, like when we're thinking about how we post roles and what do we require. What I've seen across a lot of different organizations are definitely different approaches to this. There's kind of the open-ended, anyone qualifies for this role, versus the you need to meet these requirements. And I think oftentimes hiring managers kind of lean towards the open-ended job postings, and those give me some pause oftentimes when we don't have at least some form of what are we requiring for this role. And most of the roles that I've recruited for over the years have always had some sort of basic requirement or expectation. There's not many that someone could step into the role some exceptions. Maybe it's, a role where maybe someone could have, a few months experience in this, or maybe it's a recent graduate, those things. But, or someone early in their career, I should say. But that's what I think about when I think about compliance is, organizations really thinking about how they're posting roles. Education's a big one. Is it required? Is it not? I've seen
Now you
organizations
have the
continue to
salary
use.
disclosure in some states, Joe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
another piece. That's a piece of it. Thinking about years of experience. I know, the three of us probably have been discussions about, ranges of experience. Must have 3 to 5 years. Well, what if I don't have that? Who did you hire? Those types of things that kind of keep me up at night. So I think really evaluating job postings, making sure that what we're saying we require truly are requirements, and not just continuing to use the same job postings or descriptions that have been used for 20 years, and never revisited, which I think many organizations are still kind of stuck in because we want to move so quick to get jobs posted without, kind of taking a look at what we're actually putting out there. And it's an important part of the hiring process, clearly, is, a lot of our applicants are, kind of going through very closely what the requirements are for roles, and we should be hiring for what we're posting. So I think that's what comes to mind to me when I think about compliance is, regardless of whether there's compliance concerns in terms of audits, and that it's more so like, let's make sure we're doing the right thing and hiring the right people.
Yeah. It does. I mean, those things really tie closely together, and that the candidate experience is so critical. And the average candidate is so much more savvy now these days. I mean, they pay attention to
Yep.
everything. They do not miss a trick, and we've got to give them credit for that, and not underestimate what candidates can find out, right, and can pick up, and also expect from their experience, whether we're legally bound to treat them that way or not.
Yeah, and they do their research. Yeah, they look into it, they
Yeah,
investigate it. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and
And
we've got
and I
the
like Karen's update there that
yeah.
she's working on a job posting format, keeping them to around 300 words. So that is excellent.
That's interesting, yeah. I
Yeah.
never thought about, like, the
I'm
number
gonna
of words,
share
but
that up there.
they do get super wordy. I imagine, like, the hiring managers who haven't hired in a long time, or they wanna keep using that same old job
The job
description, like,
description.
they have,
Yeah.
like, this
Hey, a
list
job description
full,
is a
and
job
they
description. It's
unroll
not a
it.
job posting.
Yeah,
You know,
right, and
the
it's
job
got, like,
posting is candidate, why do you want this job? The job description is here's everything that you have to do in this job.
Yeah.
ever, right? Like, and all the technical stuff, and
Here's
it's all
anything ever anybody ever
they
did in this
dust it
job.
off, blow the dust off, and, give it to the
Yeah.
recruiter. That's interesting, Karen. I wanna hear more about that, because 'Cause I'm thinking of, like, what is it? Oh, no, I'm thinking characters. Okay, so 300 words. So I remember we used to have to write 500-word essays. Did anybody else have to do that in school?
A
Where
few
did that
times.
300 come from?
Yeah.
Is that because of the
I'm I'm
essays? No, I don't think so.
I'm
But where,
sure
where
I
did that come from? Karen, do you know where the 300? Where did the number 300? Objective. 75%. Oh, I'm gonna put this one
mm,
up here too. When
Ah,
applicants search on mobile, okay. So it has
yeah,
to do with the visibility of the.
that's true.
Nice.
Yeah,
Hmm,
you don't want it
nice.
below the fold, as they say, because 'cause they'll miss it. And, what I've
There's no
noticed is
fold anymore.
the pay transparency for, like, California and New York and Colorado, that tends to be at the end of the job posting, like, the very bottom, and if they're sometimes they don't see it. And we've had some, and that's actually been going on recently, where we've had some questions from recruiters on what do we say, because candidates, to the ones who think that they should get the high end, right? It's a minimum and a max that are posted.
Right. It's
And
a range. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it's natural, right? As a human, you're like, oh, that's how much I could make in this job, so let me, just ask for that or expect that. And so we've had some interesting discussions around kind of the message that recruiters
Hmm.
need to give to candidates, and then also prepare hiring managers, right? We need to make sure hiring managers know,
Right.
okay, this candidate's walking into the interview, they already know. So, you're not going to have these cards to keep, close to your vest here. You've got to, we've had disclosure on this.
And then there's your current team members that might be seeing the job posting and they see the range, and I'm just going to say the range is 80 to 120,000, and they're making at that company 90, and they're seeing 120, and then they're like, wait, how come I'm not making 120? Again, it's a range, right? But that's of course the human nature. You see that somebody could be making that, and of course that
Mhm.
means you.
Right, of course.
Of course that means you. So in addition to, this is um, the regulation around equal employment opportunities and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but there's a few other organizations that enforce the uniform guidelines on employee selection. UGESP, I think, is what it's called. There's also the Department of Labor. There's also the Department of
Yep.
Justice. There's
Mhm.
the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, and that's the OFCCP one. If you have government contracts, which we were talking, the Federal Contract Compliance Program,
Right.
OFCCP. Um, and there's also medical, right? Medical information. And you don't think about that in recruiting, but it does affect what we do because it could adversely impact somebody's eligibility because of a disclosure that might be medically related that you're not supposed to disclose or you shouldn't be disclosing. So there's more than just, there's more than just equal opportunity employment is what I'm trying to say. And I think a lot of times smaller organizations are just not aware of that.
Yeah, there may be a lack of awareness. Sometimes it's just hard to manage, right? That's a lot to keep
There's a
up with
lot.
if you're a
Yeah.
small, kind of lean organization. Maybe you don't even have a recruiting operations team. There's companies that don't. And so they've got, recruiting leaders who have to wear the operations hat as well. And it gets to be a little bit challenging, I think, to keep up with all of that. And, you have to be
Yeah.
reading articles every day, I think, to stay up to the minute. Right, Joe?
Yeah. Changes quick.
Of course,
Yeah.
the ATSs and the systems aren't going to, help you with that. It's not their job.
Not usually. Yeah, not usually. Oh, Textio. I miss Textio too, Karen.
Oh, Karen is saying that the 75% applicant search on mobile is a Indeed survey result. So thank you for telling us how to
Oh,
find that. And Ed is saying that there's absolute minimums, so have to haves, right? And then
yeah.
there's nice to haves to fine tune that, um, which is, that brings into perspective the degree requirement that you mentioned earlier, right?
Hmm.
Is it necessary to have a degree requirement? And at what point is equivalent experience acceptable in lieu of a degree, right? So
Right.
things like that. And I've experienced another side of this whole equation. There are organizations that are legally allowed to discriminate on purpose because of the requirements of the job. And so it gets really complicated. It's not easy to just there's no definitive guide that is published that says here's what you have to do. If you are hiring, let's say, models, and you need people to model a particular look, um, that you can specifically say we need people that are this shape and this color. I mean, that is part of the job description because that's the job they're going to be doing. So it goes beyond that, and I think systems in general are not really equipped to handle these exceptions because there's too many exceptions. You know,
Hmm.
there's no technology that's going to be able to have all these if that's, well, if you're an employer of this size but not this, and you have the other, if you employ in this area, there's too many of these gray areas.
Yeah, so that's why you have to have,
People,
employment lawyers on
yeah,
staff,
employ
right?
people exactly.
Who
Yeah,
are not us.
there's no
Yeah.
compliance robot, is what I'm trying to say.
Right, there is not, and there never will be because like you said, there's all those agencies, and then they're at the state and even municipal levels, they can pass these pay
Yeah,
transparency
that's
laws,
right.
and to me, the big question that employers are going to probably have to answer pretty soon, as more of these pay transparency laws start to pass, is because it's not an easy thing to go in and tell Workday if the job or any other ATS, right? If the job is in this location, or if the candidate could be in this location, right? It's not where the job
Yep.
is; it's where the candidate lives. They're protected, right, by that state where they
All their
live.
jobs are remote, but if you happen to be living in this state, then
Right.
you have to disclose the salary range for that state, but not for this other state because it's different because the cost of living over there is different. So if imagine the disclosure state. If you reside in this state, it's this much. If you reside in that state, it's this. That's going to be a long job posting. Definitely over 300 words.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think the question employers are going to have to answer at some point is, rather than try to keep up with this and go in and configure our system every time we have to add a state and it changes, because these like legislatures change, right? People get voted in. That's what's happening, is these are like state legislatures that are passing these laws, and those laws can be unpassed, right? They can go away 2 years later when a different group of people come into office, and so it can sort of ebb and flow for some states, right? Some are probably going to consistently kind of stay that way. I think that the leaders in this that are coming out in front are, probably obviously going to continue to have laws like this. But at some point, employers are going to have to say, do we just do this across the board? Do we just bite the bullet and say we're going to do
Pay
this across the board?
transparency
And
across
then
the
that
board.
goes back to your compensation team to say, okay, what numbers are we going to put, right? If we're going to do it
Right.
like or nationally, right, across the entire United States. So, but I think that discussion is probably coming for
It's going to
companies.
be coming. You know why? Malicious compliance.
Yeah, I
Right.
love
There's
that
going to be
term.
employers that just say, okay, well, the range is 40,000 to 240,000. There you go. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay, that is a range, but that helps nobody. I mean,
Yeah, like every job at our company, if you look at the, most entry level job,
right.
right,
Start
it's
here. Yeah, exactly.
$17 an hour, and then, the CEO makes this much. This is a range. This is
That's
our
the
range.
range. That
Yeah,
is legitimately the range. But you'll be somewhere in the middle there, or maybe
right.
not, or
Good luck.
everybody will get paid the same as the CEO, which means the salary for CEOs is going to go down, right?
Yeah, to $17 an hour.
17 to minimum wage,
Right.
minimum wage CEOs. Um, so let's, we've had this conversation around technology being assistive, not being um, constrictive.
Prohibitive. Mhm.
Yeah. So, the applicant tracking system is unique, I think, in technology in that, first of all, it's a misnomer. It's not really an applicant tracking system because you're not really tracking applicants. It really is a requisition tracking system, if you think about it, because the workflow and the process is that of open a rec, people apply, close the rec. The process isn't of person applies, track person, right? So it's a misnomer, but also it exists because of this compliance situation, right? A lot of the rules around applicant flows and keeping a log, I had to do it back when it was pencil and paper. Literally, we had a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
And you had the disposition codes and everything in there. It came from that. Like, there's got to be a better way. Okay, so that's that where ATSs came in. But on the other side of that, the HRIS, that is decision support for executives, that is reporting, that is in some cases, it's payroll. It's how people get paid. It's how people get vacation time. Those are not necessarily optional. I would say it's almost you must have, and it's not because of compliance. It's because of rules of business. So some technology is assistive, some technology is obstructive. Is the ATS? Have we seen the end of the ATS? Are we at the point where HRISs are going to have a built-in ATS, and there's not going to be a standalone ATS? Do you think that's
I don't think so. I mean, I think, no, because I still feel like people, as someone who's, my focus has been in Workday for a number of years,
mhm,
and I talk to people all the time who've come in from, their last company they worked at used a standalone ATS.
yep, separate? Yep.
Um, I still feel like there's a huge usage of the standalone ATS, and I think because some of the challenges that happen when your ATS lives within the broader ecosystem of your full HRIS suite, right? Like Workday is an ecosystem. That's kind of the way I see it. And there's like little,
There's a
you know,
lot of
pieces of it,
components
and
to
they
it.
all
Yeah.
talk to each other, and they all have downstream impacts, or can, some of them. So you have to be hyper aware of that. And with a standalone ATS, you bolt it on to your other HR systems that you wanted to talk to, but you can also unbolt it, make your
Mhm.
changes, do some reconfig, enhancements, and then bolt it back on. And theoretically, there may be less downstream impact if you do it that way, right? If you're able to sort of keep it walled off while you make your changes.
Yeah, there's an
With
argument for,
Workday, you can't do that.
people say best in class in the technology. So buy the best in class, buy the best of the best that's going to necessarily do that job, and it could be a standalone. It doesn't have to be part of a bigger suite or ecosystem, as you said. And then there's a case for them not talking to each other, or all these other compliance issues, data transfer issues. So it's not. I don't think it's decidedly one way or the other. But what I am seeing is that there's a lot of players that are occupying this sort of in between space that are relationship management, I would almost say more on the CRM side.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
like Gem, for example, you may not be familiar with them, but Gem is essentially it's a CRM really for candidates. It is not an ATS. It doesn't replace your ATS. It works with your ATS. I believe it works with Workday. It works with Greenhouse. But the focus of it is the relationship with the candidate. So that is the nurturing of leads and prospects and candidates and so on. It's not based on specifically requisitions. The ATS does that. And I've seen the growth of this even to the tune of like LinkedIn, for example, behaving much more like this, like almost you can stay inside of LinkedIn and use LinkedIn as a candidate management tool. It's not your
Yeah,
ATS again, but so getting squeezed from Workday on this side and ecosystem on this side and CRMs on this side, the ATS slice is getting thinner. That's why I'm asking what I'm asking.
maybe so. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it'll stop at a certain
It,
point.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, it could be. I'm sure a lot of it, comes down to the expense, right? So I think there's an easy way to utilize a CRM tool or LinkedIn kind of in an ATS way. But I think it is very limiting,
it is,
and I
yeah.
think there will, to me, it's an easy way to kind of ramp up volume, but it's not always a great candidate experience
It's a
necessarily,
starter
depending on
kit.
how that's being managed. And depending on the scale too, especially, what I see the value of the ATS really, in any way, whether it's a standalone or not,
Mm,
is really being able to, allow the full recruiting team, depending on the size of the team, be able to see specific requisitions, what someone's applied to, see the history, all of that. There's some limitations, I think, in a CRM type tool. I haven't had direct experience with it, so I can't speak directly to that, but I do see in the ATS the ability to, just be able to manage the candidate lifecycle in a way that creates a positive candidate experience, and even just directing applicants on where to go for postings and that. Like, I do still think there's value in it. And when I hear organizations that aren't using an ATS, it kind of makes my head spin of wondering how they're managing, depending on what the volume is, right? If it's a smaller organization, maybe there's not, or maybe more niche where it's a smaller, number of candidates that they're interacting with. But if we're talking, I'll speak specifically about fintech space, financial services, technology. We have large applicant pools. We, are reaching out to many different
yeah.
um, applicants, and having that system in place is really critical for us. In Workday, having all those different areas integrated is like, to me, is essential. I've worked in the standalone before where those weren't connected, between payroll and HR and all these other integrations that
Right.
take
The
place.
ATS, the payroll, the HR, the different
Yeah,
systems. Yeah.
accounting and all that. And so when you don't have that, I think you're really limited as an organization. So to me, having those integrations has been really important, and it has been a game changer, I think, at least in my experience.
From a point of view of like speed and agility, basically.
Right. Yeah. And making and the consistency of the communication so that there's a single
Yeah.
source of truth, versus working out of all these different systems. And, I know there's an appeal to a CRM tool potentially because, it may be easier, or just, working in it may be, easier to navigate things like that. But my experience has always been, if you take the time to kind of learn the ATS system and how it operates, you're going to get much better results, I think, utilizing an ATS.
I think that's true with all systems. And I think that goes back to the beginning of the conversation where we were talking about, is it that system doesn't do its job, or is it that you just don't know how to do that with the system?
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
So there's
and
a
that's
user
usually
education.
one of my first reactions. I think, if I do hear that we're using a system that's not working, my question is, are we using it? Are
Are
we
we
using
using
it
it the way we
correctly?
could be?
Are we using, because oftentimes it does what we want it to do. Someone said something recently within one of our teams that, we shouldn't be surprised when systems do something specific, because that's how it's designed. It's doing what it was designed to do,
Right.
Right.
We shouldn't be
right?
surprised when the
And
robot
so,
does exactly what you told it to do.
right. So if it's
Yeah.
not working, well, maybe it's because it's not set up correctly, or we
You told
didn't,
it to do that.
right. You told it to not work correctly. So this is what we got, so
Yeah.
it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be a surprise.
That's right. The whole
That
computers don't make mistakes, people make mistakes. Yeah.
that's right. That reminds me of a Karen Walker-ism, and I'm not sure where she got it, but she calls it it's a picnic, PICNIC, and it's problem in chair, not in computer.
Yeah, yeah.
Problem
I
between
have that
chair
on a
and
T-shirt.
computer.
I was going to wear it today.
Somewhere between the chair and the computer,
Yeah,
namely
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
right,
is the
the
problem.
human. And I
Yep.
think the implementation makes such a difference too. I've encountered this as I've gone to a couple companies that have, are using Workday recruiting, and it matters so much who was there, who was making the decisions when it was implemented in the first place, and if they used like really good, solid, very experienced consultants to help them implement and set up the system. And that it's so much more painful, I think, later on, right, to try to change those things from
Oh
how they were
yeah.
set up at the beginning.
Rebuilding it.
Yeah, because again, people get so hung up on and like attached to the way we've always done it, even if there's no actual real reason for it to being to keep being done that way. And so you have to kind of overcome two things, right? The fact that everybody's busy, right? We're now busy, right? It's
Right.
implemented, we're using it, we've all got full
Too late
workload.
to change it. We don't want to change that.
We
We
don't
don't
have
want
time
to
to
change a
stop.
tire while the car's on the highway.
Exactly. That's kind of what it feels like. So there's, I think, a lot more sort of persuasion involved when, I land in a situation like that to say, well, here's the way you guys have it set up, but here's, another way that could probably be better for you. It's going to take a little work, maybe a little pain and some resources, right? We need people to help us with
Yeah.
this.
Pull over for a pit
Um,
stop, or your tire might blow up and
yeah.
cause a whole bunch of other problems that you don't want.
Right. Here's what happens if we don't, right? If we just ignore this forever, here's what's going to keep happening to you, right? Your data's not going to be good, or recruiters are not going to like shop at home first, right? If you don't, I mean, I've had folks at several companies that I've consulted at that use Workday who did not even know they could search the Workday system for candidates. And, some places they'd had Workday in place for several years, right? So that's not a small database of people who are essentially warm leads for you. They've applied for a
Mhm.
job at your company at some point in the however many years, and so let's look there first. Let's shop at home, look in our own closet, before we go out shopping around. And not that you wouldn't also go out and look for those passive candidates on LinkedIn and some of the other tools, but why wouldn't you just type in find candidates, right? But you could, those filters that come, like Joe said, out of the box from Workday aren't necessarily what you want. They don't always label the way you want your recruiters to kind of see things. And the same with find jobs in Workday. Both of those are, essentially Workday reports, but they're configurable, and, you can make them work better for you. And then the dynamic candidate pools is another. That's like an advanced search within Workday that's super handy. But I have found consistently that companies are not using that. They don't have it turned on or configured. And, recruiters who work for companies that have Workday recruiting in place didn't know it existed. So, those are kind of big things people could be doing.
Oh, wow, guys, time flies. I know we usually try to keep these to half an hour, but it's been a little bit more than half an hour, in case you didn't realize that. So this has been fun. I'd like to give
Yeah.
you both an opportunity to leave a parting shot, piece of wisdom, thought provoking something. So we'll start with Joe. Anything you
Yeah.
want to leave people with to think about over the weekend, and just a word of wisdom that you want everybody
Yeah,
to
I
know.
think one of the things we've been talking a lot about at Green Dot is metrics and how we measure success. And so, I was talking to one of my team members recently, and we were talking about how we're learning something new each day, right? And I think for me, I like that as a metric for myself, and I guess I would encourage that to anyone that's viewing is challenge yourself to learn at least one thing new each day in your role. And I think a lot of that is through your networks, through the people that you're working with. I've learned that a lot over the past couple of years, is that as we build our career in talent acquisition, we work with a lot of people over time, whether within our own organizations or that we're connected to, that have a lot of wisdom and experience. And don't hesitate to reach out to people in your network to ask questions, or if you need feedback on something or want to run something by someone. I guess I would say make it a focus to learn something, at least one thing new each day, and really utilize your network to learn from each other, share best practices, understand industry trends. And I found that we're all going through a lot of similar things. And so just leverage your networks and make sure that you're building those over time.
That's
Leverage
awesome.
networks.
Yeah. So I think there's really 2 things here. One thing I've tried to do for myself is just to kind of give myself grace because I think the types of folks who sort of land in the recruitment space, we tend to be overachievers. We tend to be really,
Type
like super
A's.
hard workers. We're a lot of type A personality. We expect a lot of ourselves. And so I think it's good to give yourself grace. And I kind of tried to do that lately in my career is to just kind of calm down and think about like what can I really get done today and not and also um, diplomatically get others to give you grace as well, right? If you feel like there's too much on your plate, and that tends to be the case for recruiters so often, is that they're asked to kind of do the impossible, right? And fill a million jobs with the best candidates ever in 5 minutes. So I think help kind of set expectations of others for you as well and stick to those. And if you do that really from the outset, or even now, even if you've been in a job a long time at the same company and same manager, I think you can still kind of stop and have a conversation to make sure that other people aren't placing impossible expectations on you as much as you can, right? We don't always have control over that, but I think those 2 things are really good. And then the other thing is just to really think about what it's like to be the candidate. I think that really changed my kind of the way I looked at being a recruiter years ago. Was someone told me that put yourself in the candidate's shoes and really try to feel what they feel. The candidate's not an annoyance. They're not, they're not doing you some kind of favor by applying for your job. Like we have to really see them, they're human beings and they've got needs and wants and things they're trying to achieve as well. And so I think I started to become more of a candidate advocate as a recruiter when I started thinking about it that way. So that was super helpful.
Cool. Well, thank you both. I
Yeah.
think we should do this more often with the people that were at the same company at the same time kind of conversations and comparing.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot to be learned
for
by that.
sure.
Doesn't happen enough. So
We've got several
thank you for
people
the idea.
in the comments who could come on and do a reunion show for you again.
Yeah,
Yes, for
reunion
sure.
show. There you go.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that. Well, thanks a lot, guys, and have a great weekend, both of you, everybody. Take care of yourselves. We will see you next Friday on Shally's Alley.
Thanks.